So we're about to start a new section in zoology. Now in class, I sectioned this together with chapter 39, chapter 40, and chapter 41, which includes the fish, the amphibians, and the reptiles. We're going to break this section up over several weeks. So we're going to, chunk it up a little bit at a time. Try not to make it too overwhelming for you because there's actually a lot to learn about each of these animal groups as we go through this chapter. So I will be sending you the PowerPoint for this entire section. However, whenever you're given assignments about it, pretty much stick to what we've covered in the video part for each section. So for example, in this first section, we're just going to go through some basic characteristics of vertebrates. We'll get into some of the basic adaptations that came about in fish. We're going to leave the amphibians and the reptiles for later on this month when we get to those. So vertebrates have three characteristics that distinguish them from other chordates that have a spinal cord. The first thing that they have is vertebrae, bones or cartilage that surround the dorsal nerve cord and form the spine. So they have a backbone, just like we have a skeletal backbone. We're going to find that in all of your vertebrates. They have a cranium, which is basically a skull that helps protect the brain. Of course, the cranium is very important for protecting the organ of our brain. Think about all the things that happen to us in our lives where you've hit your head, maybe falling off a bike. Your skulls help protect your brain from any permanent damage. Also, vertebrates have an endoskeleton. Endo means inside, so they have a skeleton on the inside all throughout their body, helps connect to the muscles, and that allows for not only protection and support, but for movement. So the big advantage of having an endoskeleton, we have three big advantages that come about by that. First, it helps protect the internal body structures. So all of the internal organs on the inside of an organism, they are protected by the skeleton in some way. There's a structure there to protect them from things happening on the outside. They help aid in movement because many times the endoskeleton connects to muscles. And of course, the muscles are going to help move the skeleton around, like your arms, like your legs. They help a lot with movement. And then it also provides structural support for terrestrial vertebrates, meaning vertebrates that live on land. Think about if you're a vertebrate like a fish that lives in the water, you have the water to support you. If you think about being in a swimming pool, the water helps you float around. You feel like you have a lot less weight to you when you're in the water. When you're on land and things that live on land, they need more structural support to stand upright when you're talking about humans, and then also to grow to bigger sizes when you're talking about other types of vertebrates. So we're going to take a general look at the 9 classes of vertebrates that exist. The first one we're going to look at are called hagfish, which look like this guy here. They actually don't have a full vertebrae, but they do have an endoskeleton and they do have a skull, so most scientists put them with the vertebrates. And they have a notochord, a spinal cord that exists throughout their life. However, they don't develop actual bone and actual vertebrae around that spinal cord. These guys, they usually eat dead, decaying things in the ocean. They kind of gang up on things that have died and eat them. So very, very invasive type of organism for things that are dying. Another class of vertebrates include the lamprey, which is pictured in our picture over here towards the right. The lamprey, they lack jaws. They're a type of jawless fish, so we'll be talking a lot about those a little bit later on in this chapter. They do have paired fins, so they have fins that show up in pairs. They have bone and an endoskeleton. They also keep their spinal cord throughout their life. Doesn't really develop into a full backbone. Our next vertebrate class includes the cartilage fish, and these organisms include sharks, skates, rays, ratfishes. They all have a skeleton that's actually made out of cartilage and not bone. So their skeleton's made out of a tough cartilage, sort of like you have in your ears and in your nose. It gives the ability for their skeleton to bend more. We're going to be spending a lot more time talking about these type of fish a little bit later on, but just basically the general idea right now that they actually have cartilage for their skeleton. Sharks and the stingrays and the ratfish pictured over towards the right are the biggest examples of our cartilage fish. Our next vertebrate class are the ray-finned fishes. So we're familiar with a lot of these because most of the fish in our area are ray-finned fish. They have jaws and they have paired fins, so fins that actually occur in pairs, and they have skeletons composed of bone. Their fins are made up of rays of little bones, so each fin has a whole bunch of bones, almost like spines in them, that stretch out that fin. So the ray-finned fish, that's what distinguishes them. The lobed-finned fish, like this coelacanth pictured to the right, they have fins that are supported by one single big bone in the middle. The lungfish and the coelacanth are the two biggest examples of that. We'll be talking about those guys more as we go on. Another vertebrate class that we're all familiar with are the amphibians. Of course, amphibian means double life, so these organisms live part of their life in water and part of their life on land. They have very thin skin, and it's permeable to gases and water. That means that water and gases can go in and out of their skin. So like in this salamander that's pictured here, its skin's very sensitive. So these guys are very sensitive to changes in their environment. If something's going wrong with a stream, the water quality, these are usually the first types of organisms that are going to be affected, and you'll see their numbers start to drop. So your salamanders, your frogs, those are your biggest examples of amphibians. Reptiles, on the other hand, have very, very dry and scaly skin, like this crocodile that's pictured over on the right. Also included in your reptiles, of course, your snakes, your turtles, lizards. We'll be talking about all of our reptiles in a little bit later on in this chapter, just looking at our basic classes right now. Birds are a large class of vertebrates that include organisms that have feathers. They have very hollow bones that makes them lightweight, so they're able to fly. A lot of them have very, very bright colors to their feathers, either to communicate to others or to attract a mate. So birds, we'll be talking about a lot of things dealing with those a little bit later on. And then our last big vertebrate class, this is where we are the mammals. So like this dolphin over here, mammals are going to be your class of organisms that have hair and produce milk. So the dolphin, of course, is a mammal that lives in water. A whale's another one that lives in the water. All of our mammals that we have on land, some of the big ones you're familiar with. A lot of you guys have cats and dogs for pets. All of those are mammals. Horses, another example of a mammal. Lots of mammals exist on Earth right now. They've adapted to live in the current conditions on Earth, so they're one of the most common vertebrates that we come across. We're going to finish up this first part of chapter 39 by talking about some basic characteristics of fish. So whenever we say fish, this refers to three distinct group of vertebrates. We're either talking about jawless fish, like the lamprey that's pictured all the way over to the left, the cartilaginous fish, like the shark that's pictured in the middle, and then the bony fish, all the fish that have real bones for their skeleton, unlike the shark, which actually has cartilage for its skeleton. One of the biggest adaptations that evolved in the fish group is jaws. Okay, jaws, they likely evolved from the gill arches of jawless fish. So when we go back and look at some of our jawless fish like the lamprey, even though they don't have jaws, they have gill slits. and we look at the genes that develop those gills and the genes that have developed jaws, they're very, very similar. So it's likely that one time, a really, really long time ago, some of those jawless fish had a mutation that led to them eventually forming what we now know as jaws. Okay, obviously they were probably very, very small jaws back then. They probably barely worked, but they might have allowed the jawless fish to get a little bit more food in their environment. So those with the slightly better working jaws were the ones that survived the most, and they passed on those genes, and those jaws got better and better over time. So that's what we're seeing in our picture here. We're seeing a jawless fish eventually when we're going through hundreds of thousands of years, these mutations can add up that can lead to, actually in this group, eventually getting some fish that have jaws and eventually becoming different species. Another big adaptation that occurred in fish was a very streamlined shape and a muscular tail. So this allowed them to swim much more quickly than things that existed before them. So this means that they could, one, get away from predators at a faster rate, so that increased their survival. They could swim long distances, go to different parts of the ocean, and they could also, especially some of the bigger fish, be able to swim fast to catch their prey. So those are very important adaptations. Also, the adaptation of paired fins. This gave them balance in the water. And when we look at the genetic and fossil evidence, it looks like these paired fins, the ones on the side of the fish, eventually they gave rise to paired limbs on very ancient organisms that eventually left the ocean and began to live on land, some of our land vertebrate ancestors. So some pretty important developments occurred in fish. Most fish also have a swim bladder that's located on the inside. At some point in this chapter, I'll be sending you a fish dissection video where you'll see the swim bladder. We can see it pictured in the left picture over here, that little clear, almost bag-looking type thing that's coming out of the fish. It's also labeled in the diagram in the picture to the right. These fill with air and they make the fish buoyant, meaning that it can float in the water. So it can put more gas into that swim bladder if it wants to raise its position in the water, or if it wants to lower itself down while it's swimming, it can allow gas out of that swim bladder so it drops down towards the bottom. So another really important adaptation that helped fish survive. Our last few adaptations that I want to mention in our last part of this video include the lateral line. So the lateral line that we see on these two fish here, most fish you can see them in, some easier than others. It's that line of cells that kind of squiggle down the side of the body of the fish. You can see they look sort of like little ridges on that picture. This lateral line allows fish to sense vibration in the water. These are vibration sensitive cells, so they can sense movement and vibration near them. That's helpful because if you're a small fish, this allows you to feel if something bigger is swimming near you, and it makes it easier for you to sense that right away and escape. If you are a predator, that can help you sense smaller types of fish that are around you and help you get your food. So very, very important adaptation for fish that we see in that picture. Lastly, kidneys. They are going to first come about in fish. They help to filter waste out of the blood. Same type of function that they do in us. So another really important adaptation that first comes about in our classes of fish.